Back for part 2 of what I assume will be a many-part series. We are going to continue on our treaties. We are going to look at the Fort Laramie Treaty, which comes a year after the Medicine Lodge Treaties. Now, the Medicine Lodge Treaties had settled all these points and plans and deals, and now in 1868 we get the Fort Laramie Treaty. And the government decides that, when it's in their best interest, they are going to agree not to build the road that we talked about through the Sioux hunting grounds to connect those gold mining towns, and they abandoned 3 forts that they had there before. They also give the Black Hills to the Sioux Reservation, which is in the Dakotas, which matters because the Black Hills are very reverential to the Sioux. It is a part of their culture. It is a part of their nature, and they believe in the Black Hills as, I believe they're called the 7 fathers, 7 grandfathers. I have to double check that, but I know it's very reverential to them. And they also promise under the Fort Laramie Treaty to give the Sioux a school, some other communal buildings, and all the Sioux have to do is sign the treaty to live on the reservation under federal supervision with federal government support, and that supervision will be the same as it was for the Medicine Lodge treaties. And this is supposed to bring peace, right? It's supposed to create peace between the tribes and the settlers. But again, if we can remember what happens with Andrew Jackson and our Trail of Tears, it's not a very peaceful agreement in the end. It's very skewed towards what the American people want. So we know that the Navajo had been forced into areas further out west, and then we know the Cherokee were moved from, and the Creek and the Choctaw have been moved out west. But we are going to continue moving them out west. We talked about this already briefly, right? Things are building up to tragedy here. Natives are confined to isolated areas, which are regularly ravaged by poverty and disease because they're not getting the same benefits that they had before. The government fails to live up to many of the promises in their treaties, and usually their treaties are just there as like a stopgap. And as soon as the government or the United States discovers something that they need on that land, that treaty is gone and they don't uphold it. There's a lot of frustration, particularly among the younger warriors. And then a lot of times, as it does, this frustration turns to violence. And guns start to replace the treaties as the governments continue to fight back on the Native Americans who are not following the required rules, right? If you're not following the treaties, if you're not living on the reservation, the U.S. government is putting you down with violence. They're seeing this as an act of rebellion. So the young warriors and some of the other, or even the older warriors, the tribes, a lot of them also turn to violence because they call it Custer's last stand, but realistically, this was the indigenous people's last stand, and they did it with their whole hearts to protect what their way of life had always been, that is now about to be decimated, although they may not know at the time, although I think they were pretty aware. So we have the Trail of Tears, right? But we have other events as well. In 1863, again, during the Civil War, a frontiersman named Kit Carson is sent to stop the Navajo from fighting. The U.S. is trying to focus their energy on the Confederate States. We need the military. We can't be fighting the tribes out west as well. And so we send Kit Carson out to stop the Navajo fighting, and Carson and his forces end up destroying homes, crops, and livestock of the Navajo. 2/3 of the 12,000 Navajo who were fighting surrender after that. The ones who surrendered, Kit Carson sends them on a 300-mile forced march to a new reservation in New Mexico. This comes to be known as the Long Walk of the Navajo. The Navajo are not used to conditions in New Mexico. 300 miles is a long way to go. And so now they're forced into this reservation far away from what they're used to. It's a different conditions. It's a different living area. It's just not what they're used to. The soil is not good for their agriculture. They are forced to live with the Apache, who are their enemies. And they are there for 4 years facing death, starvation, and disease on the reservation before the government eventually allows them to return to a reservation on their own homeland. So they are forced to go to what's called the Bosque Redondo Reservation, It is in present-day Arizona and eastern New Mexico, but the Navajo lived in Colorado and Utah. So those are very different. And you may not know much about Colorado, Utah versus Arizona, New Mexico, but even that little further south, that's a very different climate. It's hot. It's a whole different situation. It's like being in a different country. So consider why moving just that little further south would cause so many problems for the Navajo. Of course, the Navajo are not the only ones who have to deal with this. We have briefly touched upon the Kiowa, the Comanche, the Arapaho, the Cheyenne, but we're going to look into them more now because those are the Plains tribes, and they see a lot more conflict. We have what is known as the Red River War. This is after the end of the Civil War. So the U.S. government has failed to abide by and enforce the terms of their Medicine Lodge treaties of 1867, which should not be a surprise to any of us. White hunters are not kept off their land, the food and supplies are not delivered, and whites are not punished for breaking the laws. So the Kiowa, Comanche, the Arapaho, the Cheyenne, they get really fed up because they've signed this treaty and it was understood that the U.S. government would keep the U.S. out of it, and they're not. So they get fed up and they attack the Texans, which starts to cause more fighting. By 1874, we consider the Kiowas and Comanches have met their final defeat because the buffalo herds are gone. And when the buffalo herds leave, again, if you're living off bison and buffalo, your way of life is gone. And so this opens the western panhandle of Texas to white settlers. And the buffalo herd was purposely decimated by Americans. That's important to note. It didn't just disappear. Americans were told to hunt the buffalo to extinction because the goal was to aid the destruction and assimilation of the native tribes. And so the U.S. members were purposefully hunting buffalo to extinction. There's pictures of the piles of buffalo skulls that they collect. It was meant to eliminate a culture, which again, we've talked about is a definition of genocide. And the Kiowa and Comanche cannot continue their way of life. So that is a successful end to their tribes because by 1874, they're gone. We also have perhaps what people are more familiar with is the Battle of Little Bighorn. Now remember, we gave the Black Hills to the Sioux, right? But then in 1875, with more gold discovered in this region, the Black Hills bring more white settlers to look for gold in that area, which are the Sioux hunting grounds in the Dakotas, which we've already given them. And this was supposed to be protected by the Fort Laramie Treaty. And so our Chief's Crazy Horse and Chief Sitting Bull assemble their Sioux to drive out the settlers. Again, they're trying to uphold the treaty that's not being honored. The U.S. Army, doing what it does best, sends troops to shut down Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse. Unfortunately, for some people, in June of 1876, General Custer decides he's going to take his cavalry unit ahead of the rest of the troops. He's going to take it in his own hands. He's going to be a hero. And he heads out west and he goes off ahead of the rest of the troops. And he arrives a day earlier than the main forces who are supposed to be backing him up. And unfortunately for Custer and his 250 men, they come upon a group of 2,000 Sioux, Lakota in the area, resting near Little Bighorn River. And Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull are not going to take this. So Crazy Horse leads the charge to get rid of these men. They kill Custer and the men. The army, because now they're angry at the wrong people, right? Custer didn't follow his orders. He should have waited. The army decides that they need revenge now, so they're going to hunt down Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull. And Crazy Horse will eventually surrender after he's beaten down by weather and starvation. But Sitting Bull and his small group of followers are going to escape to Canada, where they will stay for a little bit longer. And we will continue the story of that as we continue with our Plains conflicts.